Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about the Standard Phalaenopsis. Now, these phals, from my experience in orchid growing for 2 years, kind of get a bad name and a bad rep because you can kind of find them everywhere in department stores, and they're the flower shop orchids. They even have developed some nicknames such as the peasant orchid, which isn't so nice, but they're also known as moth orchids, having to do with where the term Phalaenopsis comes from. I believe it directly translates to moth orchid or moth flower or something. Don't want to get into all that. But honestly, they're staples of the orchid culture. Right after the Cattleya, which I found out was like the original corsage flower for formal attire. Go figure. But yeah, I love the Standard Phals, and I thought, why not make a video on them, because they are pretty consistent orchids, and there's so much there's so much to say about them, whether it be pros and cons, and I thought I'd give my feedback. And I want to actually wear a phal on my wedding day. But anyway, let's get into why these are easy to grow. So there are 4 factors that I've once mentioned in a previous video that orchids sort of fall under that make them easy to grow. And those 4 factors are the light, water, temperature, and humidity. And all 4 of these are very easy to manage for your Standard Phalaenopsis. Now, jumping right into light / location here, when you purchase or when you're given one, for example, as a gift, a phal, you want to make sure it's in a bright area that has indirect light. And I know that's a pretty common saying, but pretty much you don't want to put it directly in the sun rays. You want to just put it away from them, but maintain it in a bright area. I grow under lights, but a windowsill or placing it on a table that's located in a bright room works. The key here is the duration once you find that bright level. The orchids, if you'd like it to bloom a lot, do normally like a duration of light of a minimum of 12 hours. I hear some people can get away with 10, but 12 to maybe even 14 hours is a great duration of time if you'd like to induce blooming or all-around great growth for your Standard phal. Now, one of the things that comes along with your lighting, especially if you have a very bright light, is the plant producing what's called anthocyanin. So sometimes your plant will develop or redden. It'll develop a redness in the leaves. It's basically a tan, it's not a burn, so you don't have to worry. If you don't like this, you can just lower the light or move it somewhere where the light level is lower. Me personally, I do like the appeal of the red leaves and the red tints on a lot of my orchids, so I do just leave them. The thing that you want to be concerned about, if ever there's a concern, is the warmth. This is why you don't want to put them in areas that have direct sunlight. You don't really have to worry about this when you're growing under strip LEDs, but if your leaves are ever warm, you want to make a change immediately, because it's the warmth in tandem with the light that will cause the burn. And simply feeling your leaves will give you a great gauge on whether you have to make that change or not, because 99% of the time I find my leaves are just cool no matter what the temperature is, because my temperatures aren't so hot. The leaves are always really cool to the touch. So good light means good blooming and good growth for the plant, in tandem with temperature, which we'll also get into in a moment. But before we go to temperature, let's go to watering, because watering is probably the next big topic, and overwatering is probably the biggest killer of most orchids and most plants in general. It's actually better to underwater if you're, unsure. The rule of thumb with watering your Standard Phalaenopsis is to basically water it when it's dry. Simply water it when it's dry. I don't recommend ice cubes. Simply watering with lukewarm water, whether it's under your faucet or using a watering can, and just saturating the pot is fine. And normally the dry time is dependent on two things, your environment and what you have it potted in. So the environment, let's just use mine for example. During the spring and summer, I water 2 times a week, about every 8 days. In the fall and winter, I water 1 time a week, all because the drying time is different during these 2 seasons, or during these 4 seasons, if you will. So basically, your roots will gray when they need water, and they'll be completely succulent and green when they don't need water. Now, for the most part, you'll probably only be able to see the roots that are on the outer rim of the pot. Normally, when I see these roots are gray, I wait a day or two to water just to ensure the roots on the inside that I can't see have dried as well. One of the best ways that you can gauge when to water is the pot weight. I've been doing this for 2 years, so I know how the pot feels when it's wet and saturated versus when it's dry and airy and needs, a good watering. So I stress learning the pot weight because it's a really, really good indicator. And for most of us who are always bothering our plants or moving them, you kind of get a gauge of what that feels like anyway. Moving on from your environment and sticking with the pot weight, the potting mix or media is another factor that's going to determine how fast your pots dry out. I grow organically, so I can only provide a testament for growing in bark and moss. When you grow in bark, you have a more airy, dry mix. And when you grow in moss, it's also airy if you pot it that way. But it maintains more moisture. And what I mean by potting it airy is you can pot it dry or pot it a bit moist or wet, but you don't want to pack it down. You don't want to pack it tightly. Of course, you want to squeeze it into the pot, but just not so aggressively, basically. Moss can absorb several times its weight when it absorbs water, so you don't need a lot of it. So basically, the theory is more moss, you water less frequently and with less water, so you're spending less time pouring the water into the pot. And if you're using more bark, you want to water more, increase the frequency and the amount. Now, if you're going to mix these things, your watering frequency is going to be up to you. I do mix, but I use more bark because my standard phals appreciate the drying out a bit more. You can let them dry a bit more often than not, and they will actually enjoy and appreciate it. They love the saturation on watering day after a really good drying out. Next, moving on to temperature. Now, standard phals are intermediate growers, which means they do love a range of temperature about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. I believe that's about 20 degrees Celsius, and giving this to them year-round is pretty perfect. Now, for most of us that grow indoors and in our homes, it's very easy to maintain this because these are very comfortable temperatures, and if you're comfortable, your orchid's comfortable. If you can feel a chill or a bit of a more warmth, your orchid can also feel that. Now, you do have, the separation of seasons where you'll have faster growth when it's warmer and slower growth when it's cooler. So if your house is a bit warmer, your plants will grow a bit faster, and vice versa when it's cooler. Now, temperature with regard to standard phals does play a big role in blooming. So mainly in the fall, sometimes in the spring, but mainly in the fall, during the nighttime for a couple of weeks, you want to have a 10 to 15 degree drop in Fahrenheit, and I believe that's a 3 to 5 degree drop in Celsius in the evenings or night. These temperature drops will tell the plant that it's blooming time and to put a spike out. During this time, you want to also provide as much light as possible, even if you have to supplement with some grow lights, because the light is also what will help the plant to bloom, and the spike will actually go in the direction of the light. Now, to segue with regard to temperature, because I know some people will say, well, my orchid blooms all year round. Now, because these plants are mass produced, some will bloom all year round regardless of the conditions. And I have two examples in my collection to show, and I've learned some of the species parents as to why many of our Phalaenopsis will bloom all year round. So one example is the Sogo Vivian. Now, there are three parents in the Sogo Vivian: the Equestris, the Stewartiana, and the Schilleriana, which give it the ability to bloom all year round. The Equestris is a warmer bloomer, so it blooms in the summertime, and the Stewartiana is a spring bloomer, and Schilleriana a winter and spring bloomer. The other parents in the background also include the Amabilis and Aphrodite, which also bloom in the wintertime. So because you have all these mixes and all these hybridizations done over time, my plant that I have, my Sogo Vivian, just blooms all year round. I find myself cutting a spike and seeing a spike a few days later. Another example I have is actually a no ID. I call him Phal Dorian. I don't know why, the name just came to me when I saw him in Whole Foods. Now, this no ID Phal, because of the mottled leaves and the pink blooms it has when I bought it, I am very, very leaning toward believing that this has the Schilleriana in the background, which blooms in the spring. And here we have it spiking in the spring. Now, because I bought it from Whole Foods, it's a no ID Phal, and most likely it will have Amabilis and Aphrodite in the background. So there's a possibility that it'll give me a spike in the fall as well. I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. It's definitely something to follow. So that basically wraps it up with temperature, because it's very interesting when it comes to the overall growth and a special blooming of the plant. Lastly, and with all my topics, humidity, I don't really focus on too much. I have humidifiers in my grow space. However, I live in the DC area, and without the humidifiers, my humidity doesn't really drop below 30%. I've seen it at 23 as the absolute lowest. And when I have my humidifiers running, the humidity lingers between 45 and 60% depending on what's going on outside. So if the humidity is high outside and my humidifiers are running, 60% is very easy to maintain. And if the humidity is low outside and the humidifiers are running, 45 to 50 is pretty easy to manage. And with that, I leave you all, and please leave some comments down, because these standard Phals really just shock me on how they grow. I'm gonna go ahead and show the original Phal that I bought. I call her Phal Ruby. She's an all-white Phal, and she's my test Phal. I definitely recommend, if you're gonna run any type of test, to do it on one of these, because they're very versatile, they're very forgiving. The roots are something that are very easy to watch, and they're good indicators on where the plant is going, the roots and then the leaves. As you can see, my Phal Ruby is a very huge plant. She hasn't bloomed for me again yet, but I have put her through the ranks, and now her roots are coming in like crazy and actually destroying the bottom leaves, which I don't mind, because she's doing it herself, so I guess she knows what she's doing. But the new leaves coming in are huge. Basically, they're solar panels. That's how these plants work. And I can't wait to see what she does in the fall. I hope she gives me some blooms. So follow me on social media. My Instagram and Facebook handles are up there. I go by The Right Path. I'll definitely be showing where Ruby's going on there, as well as some YouTube videos once I figure out how to, manage this content, because I'm trying very hard not to say the same things over and over. I don't know how you guys do it, but I'm having so much fun. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.